The following podcast is not relating to my teachings and work at Del Cedar Medical Center and is for entertainment purposes only.
Hello, everybody. This is Miguel Montero introducing a new episode of The Life of Flow. Today, we had the honor, the privilege of talking to Ryan Blasko. Ryan is right now Director of Global MedTech Executive Search for the Mullings Group. And I think that you guys are going to find it all super interesting, specifically you physicians, considering a life in the entrepreneur world and the potential of being part of the business side of things, not just the clinical side of things. I learned a lot. His company really connects companies to physicians or physicians to companies. It was super interesting, and stick to the very end because at the end he's got some great pearls on professional and personal branding and how to really differentiate yourselves as you're building that potential avenue in your careers. So anyway, Lucas, I thought you liked it.
I loved it.
You enjoyed it?
Yeah, cool, I think it opens up a lot of areas that I didn't really know.
That we're normally not accustomed to knowing about, right?
So it's very tactical. So I loved it. Thank you so much to Ryan. And vamos.
Vámonos.
Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
All right, so I am driving. No, I wasn't driving. I was in the middle of, some god-awful day. And I get an email, and it was an email essentially from somebody that I hadn't really had a connection. It's kind of like out of left field. And it was like, hey, I'm trying to find a CEO for a company, and I was told that you know this person. Do you have 2 minutes to talk?
Mm-hmm.
And, I didn't know that person. And I thought it was somebody that I really liked. So I kind of needed to make sure that was legit. There was some meat to this. And so I reached out to that one. I said, hey, are you trying to do this? Oh, yes. So I understood what that was all about. And so anyway, a couple of text messages, days back and forth. I had the pleasure of meeting Ryan. And then he gave me this rundown. He's like, hey, I'll let him, I won't butcher his mission, his company's mission, but it was essentially kind of like a talent scout within the medical industry. And he was trying to get an understanding of the acumens, the professional acumens, leadership acumens of this one person who was being set to be the CEO of a startup company. And so I understood in a very superficial way what he did. And then we had a conversation. That I was just immediately tickled by the whole concept. And so I started asking a lot more questions. And then I was like, I think that we should really do a podcast about this because I thought that was really cool. And then, I read more about him and where he came from. And maybe there's even times that we've even met before. So I am profoundly apologetic if we had at some point shared, because then I'm like, hey, he was in Boston and he was in CSI. I mean, chances are we crossed paths at some point. But anyway, I thought that was really cool. And so today I think we should talk about who Ryan is, because I thought also he has a really cool background in his story, from an exceptional ball player, to some military stuff, to where he's at right now. But also a little bit about the company, because I think our listeners, which by the way, Ryan, our listeners are 30 to 50. That's our demo. Split by the half, physicians, multi-specialty, and Salesforce. So it seems like there's a lot, which we never really, there wasn't, we didn't think, and it was all of a sudden all these reps, and probably people in the cath lab are now kind of following, and obviously logically so. In retrospect, we're like, that definitely should have been a pitch. But so I think that you can appease both sides of the aisle on this talk today, and I, from both of us, we also thank you for spending hopefully a good hour of or investing a good hour of your life here on a weekend with us. So thanks for logging in, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Well,
Excited to do this. Yeah.
Let's do like a little high level view of where what gets you ticking, the human side of you, and then we can start kind of understanding a little bit more about your role in the company and what the company does. Give me a little high level view of where you came from.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a small town kid. Grew up in a town called Mishawaka, Indiana, right outside of South Bend near Notre Dame. So, big Notre Dame football fan. My brother's actually the director of media relations over there. So, go back for the 7 home games and the tailgate every fall. And my story is not unlike many people's. I mean, it is in its own unique way, but certainly small town kid. Got in with some big companies, moved around for those companies, and here I am today talking on a podcast with you guys. But really, my formative years was all about competition. I love baseball my whole life. Thought I was going to be a pro baseball player, but at 5'9", about 150 pounds, that probably wasn't the reality. Had a college scholarship, but it wasn't going to work out for us financially to do that. So I went into the Army out of high school, and I was in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, going through basic training. Passed out during a hike and found out I had more severe asthma than I thought, and was booted out of the military, medical discharge.
Oh, wow.
You cannot be in the Army with asthma.
Oh.
So this, keep in mind, this was like mid to late 90s. So a lot has changed since then, thankfully. But I came home. Girlfriend at the time was excited to see me. I was excited to see her. Then had a kid. So
How old
19 years. I was
19.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Was not planned. But listen, all things happen for a reason. Yeah, it was crazy. So fast forward, I'm 28 years old. That's a big jump, but have 3 kids at that point. So really started a family early. And during that time, I was going to college because everything was crazy. And I was working 4 jobs, just trying to make ends meet.
Wow.
And when I graduated, I could just work 1 job. I was like, wow, what a relief. Like, this is easy. My dad had owned a bar in South Bend called the Boat Club, which was a big student bar. So I would bartend and bar back for my dad while in college. I worked for a CBS affiliate called Channel 22, WSBT. And I had my own movie review show while I was in college called Blasko's Box Office, which was great. Yeah. If I liked the movie, it got four buckets of popcorn. If I didn't like it, it got 0. My demographic, you mentioned yours earlier, mine was probably the 50 to 70-year-old crowd that was getting up at 5 a.m. to watch the morning news. But I would give away free tickets to the movies. And that was fun because I had worked in a video store, which those don't even exist anymore.
Like Blockbuster?
A local one called PJ's Video. It was like the Blockbuster of my hometown.
Be kind, rewind.
I love this story.
Yeah, it was fun.
Did you? You're a little younger. Did you ever hit those? Did you ever rent at a Blockbuster?
Yeah, of course. And then local ones in Puerto Rico too. I don't remember the name, so yeah.
Well, the bootleg ones,
games.
The bootleg ones,
just like dinky. Like there was one of my grandma's old San Sebastian that we would go to. It would have no new movies, just like really old ones.
Growing up in Costa Rica, bootleg rentals was huge, but huge.
All Chuck Norris movies.
Yeah,
I remember that one of the coolest thing was. And you'd always there was always this. The sound was always horrible, whatever. And I don't remember what movie it was. It was one of the new movies, and I'm talking about probably the mid '90s. And then all of a sudden, I see a little black silhouette at the bottom of the screen,
moving along the
and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, there's this chick eating popcorn going by. They were filming in the movie theater, and they would just smuggle the cameras and show you.
I remember that.
I love that. So what was do you remember all-time favorite couple of movies?
Yeah, everybody asks that since they know how much I love movies. And,
4 popcorn reviews.
That's right. So every movie from probably 1998 to 2002 in theaters I watched for a 4-year stretch there.
Wow.
Because I got tickets to the local Cinemark movie theater. It was called Movies 14. And I could take a guest for free. So me and my brother, me and my best buddy, we'd go watch movies all the time. And during that time, like Saving Private Ryan had come out,
Good movie.
Shakespeare in Love, Life is Beautiful. A lot of these movies that won Academy Awards or were nominated. But if you want to talk favorite movies, you have to go by category. And for me, like I'm a comedy guy. I grew up watching, Animal House and National Lampoon's Vacation and those types of movies. My favorite comedy growing up, was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Steve Martin, John Candy.
I don't know if I've ever watched that.
If you haven't watched it, add it to the list.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious movie. That's probably one of my favorite comedies. And then I like dramas too. And Anthony Hopkins was always an actor that just kind of blew me away with his performances. And I thought he was incredible in Legends of the Fall. That's one of my favorite movies, a drama.
Yeah, of course. Brad Pitt, Tristan.
That's right.
Of course.
Yeah. That movie kind of had it all.
What a movie.
He was also great as Hannibal Lecter, right? I mean, who can forget Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah.
So I'm a big Anthony Hopkins fan. Even Meet Joe Black, it was probably an hour too long. Another Hopkins, Brad Pitt film.
Yeah.
But another great movie because I just love Anthony Hopkins. So those are some of my favorites, modern day favorites. You got to look at movies like Superbad. As a comedy.
That's so funny. Jesus Christ. You're right. I was going to say Wedding Crashers. I always laugh at Wedding Crashers. But
that's one you can watch over and over.
Yeah, just a Vince Vaughn. I like
Superbad is just like
dry comedy.
Like I just laughed just saying the name Superbad.
Yeah, Step Brothers is another one that you have to put in that category of just. Yeah. So I rate movies, guys, on replay value. So if I can watch it over and over again, like Shawshank Redemption, right?
Yeah.
That's $4 buckets of popcorn, hands down.
Yeah.
The Green Mile, same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so what I do is I find a director that I really like, and I watch all their films. So Frank Darabont did Shawshank Redemption. He also did The Green Mile. So that's kind of my thing. But yeah, we better stop talking movies, or that's all.
That's the
one last.
That's fine.
Tarantino. Okay. Fan or not? It's like a love or hate relationship. Everybody, I love Tarantino.
So he's hit or miss for me. Reservoir Dogs kind of put him on the map.
Yeah,
I know. So the scene though where they're torturing the police officer, you'll never get that out of your brain. Every time I hear "Stuck in the Middle with You," that's all I think about. Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction is the best.
Right, he did great early. By the way, I'm going to send you a picture of me and Bing Rames, Marcellus Wallace.
Really?
I'm sitting in Vancouver. I'm there for a wedding, and in the hotel lobby is Marcellus Wallace, and that's what I called him. And so there's a picture of he and I like clasping hands.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he's just an awesome guy. But no, for Tarantino, I think you have to add like modern day classics like Django and Inglourious Bastards to like his all-time great list. There's some misses in there for me with him. Jackie Brown was decent too, but like Hateful Eight, I couldn't even get through it. It was so long, so boring for me. But a lot of people liked it. So anyway, those are my Tarantino films.
Okay.
All right.
So I got off track. All
right. You were working at
the movie store.
Yeah.
Bottom line, I see a buddy of mine from high school, and he was in my freshman pre-algebra class when he was a senior. So I'm like, not the sharpest guy, but he was looking sharp. He had a suit on. I said, "What are you doing these days?" He said, "I work for Cintas, the uniform people." He's like, "They give me, $35,000 a year salary. They give me a car." Keep in mind, this is like 2002. He's like, "I'll probably make like $77,000 with commissions this year." And I was like, "This guy's rich. Like, I'm not making that much money working at the news station. Like, how do I work for this place?"
Yeah.
And so he said, "Hey, we're hiring. Get me your resume." So I did. And that was my first sales job right out of college was Cintas Corporation. And they have incredible training. In fact, when I worked at Boston Scientific, everybody I hired was from that company.
Interesting.
So that was my way into medical. I got recruited out of Cintas into medical device. Had a 10-year run at Boston Scientific across different divisions. Then I left there for a year, went into private equity, venture capital. A friend of mine from Notre Dame, former Deloitte and West Monroe Partners guy, opened a company. So I went to work for him as a vice president of business development. And then CSI called when they were launching their radial peripheral device and their coronary atherectomy device, and they needed a director of sales out of Chicago. So then I went to CSI for 2 years. And then my final med device job was at a company called Ambu. I was the national director of sales, and they were launching single-use scopes across 3 different specialties. But GI was their focus, and I had a good bit of GI from my Boston Scientific days. So that was that. And now I'm at the Mullings Group, building companies and careers. We typically work with companies 150 million or less in revenue, and we hire everybody from their CEO, to the individual contributors, quality, regulatory people. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now, and that's why we were talking here recently, and that's what led to all this.
So what is, tell me a little bit about the inception of the Mullins Group. Who started this? How long has it been around?
Mm-hmm.
What necessity did it fill? Because obviously it's successful, and to have a successful business, you have to find a niche. So walk me a little bit through that.
Well, the CEO and president's a guy named Joe Mullings, and he's been in the recruiting game for 32 years. And he really made a splash when he teamed up with a guy named Scott Hunnekens, who, if you look at somebody who's invested in some of the best med tech companies that have successfully exited, Scott's name is on those companies. So Scott and Joe worked together on a project called Verb Surgical. It was a joint venture between Google and J&J in robotics. And Joe had to hire 300 people for this company. And he knew there was no way he could do it on his own with a small boutique headhunting firm. So they switched to video to get talent to come to them. And that's where video was born at the Mullings Group. And it's really what's put us on the map. We have about 175,000 sets of eyes on our content every day between all the followers that Joe has and our company has and people like me. So that's really why they've been successful, is hard work and, of course, evolving over the years. And then his relationships from 32 years are ever present now. He's worked with some of the biggest legends in industry, as you can imagine. And that's why I left Med Device. I wouldn't have left for any, run-of-the-mill recruiting firm. They are subject matter experts, industry consultants, and they really work on three things: advisory, media, and search. Search built the business. The other things sort of complement it. And then we do podcasts like this. I have a podcast on the show. Joe's got several. A lot of my teammates have them, and that helps, again, draw talent to our company and founders.
So what kind of relationships do you guys try to foster with physicians that are clinicians? Sure. They're expert in what they're doing. And most people don't even know these opportunities exist or even how to approach them. So let's dive into that.
Well, part of it is hiring people like myself from industry. We have another guy named Mike Moore that worked for J&J for years, a gentleman named AJ Nair, who also came from the space. So that's number one: hire people from the industry that have physician relationships and bring them into the firm. Secondary to that, a lot of these physicians will found their own companies. And that's when Joe and the team get to meet them and help them build out their companies. So that's really how it's nurtured. And then, of course, we're at damn near every society meeting, every major medical conference. So how do you form relationships? Frequency and proximity. The frequency around physicians like you and how close we are in the ecosystem, that really helps nurture those relationships. And then, of course, we'll have you on our shows and you have a good experience. And what do you do when you have a good experience? You tell your friends and colleagues about it. So we get referred by physicians to other physicians and founders to other founders on a regular basis.
Who would you say is your top client? Is it a physician looking for an opportunity, or is it the opportunity looking for a physician?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on who you ask. So for Joe, it's probably companies looking for talent. People like me who have worked with physicians so long, I get more calls from, physicians and, people from the medical establishment. But really our business is finding the puzzle pieces and putting them together. So if a company says, hey, I need a chief medical officer, and I've talked to either of you and you say, hey, I'm not quitting my day job at Hope Vascular and Podiatry, but I will be a fractional or interim CEO, right? Or CMO, or I'll go on contract. So we have a whole other side of our business that is contract as well. So it just depends on the account executive. I'm a director. Of course, Joe's the president and CEO. We've got Matt Kaufman and Holly Scott that are partners at the firm. We all have different relationships that sort of nurture what you're talking about.
So considering that most of our audience is probably starting or maybe mid-career, what in your thought, for those out there that are tickled by entrepreneurship. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be entrepreneurship, but most likely entrepreneurship, startup, early projects. That kind of like this idea of a chief medical officer role, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a particular time in your career that you think is best suited? Do you just start off the gate and you say, screw clinical, I hate this shit, I gotta go into business? Is it better to have a little bit of years under your belt? Or is it better to be more towards the end where, hey, you're stepping back, you don't want to be doing clinical, so you're just finding something to do with your time? What's the sweet spot?
Well, number one, you have to have a passion to want to leave clinical practice and do more of the business, right? You can do both, but it's hard. Once people make the shift to industry, they tend to stay, on the industry side. So for me, my phone usually starts ringing when the doctors say, Ryan, I'm kind of burned out. I'm tired of dealing with insurance companies. I'm tired of being an employee of the hospital. I don't want to run an ASC or an OBL anymore. What opportunities do you have for me? And we can hook them up with people that are looking for advisory from a physician in a particular space, right? So say it's a vascular thrombectomy company. I grab a physician that's been doing that sort of procedure that has called me recently and says, hey, if you have any consulting opportunities for those types of companies, I would be interested. That's really how it works. That's really when my phone starts ringing. So a particular time is, when are you passionate about making a change in your life? Because if you're not, you guys know what it's like, the commitment. I mean, you opened your own business, right? You had to be so fed up with the way things were. You have to have so much pain with the status quo that you're willing to change it. And that's really when it tends to happen and when it's the most successful.
And what skill sets do you look for besides, obviously, the clinical experience, clinical acumen? Is there a particular type of skill sets that would suit someone well that wants to go into this to start, developing themselves to eventually get into a position like this?
Sure. Decisiveness. I mean, that's important in any business, right? If somebody lacks the ability to make a decision or point somebody in the right direction, usually being paid a pretty nice amount of money to be a consultant, right? Or a chief medical officer. So they're going to want some decisiveness so they know which direction to go with their product, which direction to go with their strategy. You two both get to work with industry as part of what you do, and you can see what companies do it well and what companies don't do it so well. It's the same with the advisors to these startups. They need people that are decisive, that can connect them with the right people to move their business forward, their clinical studies forward. So that's one. Two is podium presence, right? You want somebody that has the gravitas to be able to maybe captivate a room. You may be asked to be part of a pitch that they're doing to add credibility to their product. So if you haven't done a pitch, that could be difficult if you're sitting up there saying and right. the whole time, right? So the podium presence is important. And after that, I would say it's just, again, the passion piece. It's going to show through if like, hey, I'm just doing this for a paycheck, or I'm just doing this as a side hustle. If they don't truly believe that you believe, forget it. So if it's a product you're not willing to use in your own practice or on your own family member, they're going to see right through that.
It was interesting, this fractional thing you mentioned. I also think that you start getting old when a lot of your friends start becoming CMOs.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know. Like all these guys that I've been, for the last, I don't know. I've been on the speaker podium circle for 15, 16 years or whatever. And a lot of the guys that have been there with me are now, they're and of actually big companies, right? I mean, I don't know who I'm thinking. Anyway, I can think of 3 or 4 of them that are now in, Michael Jaff and Boston Scientific, and what's his name, North Carolina, now with Cordes. Anyway, but those are full-time positions. And you mentioned fractional positions. So Can you explain the opportunities on the fractional side?
Sure. How
much is a healthy fractional position and how often are they out there? Because I'm sure people like Lucas that are probably 6-7 years out that may be tickled by this part of it, but are not necessarily ready to leave their practice and are actually in the getting to the peak of their careers, they wouldn't want to stop their practice. Are there opportunities for those people?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's healthy for one might not be healthy for another. So I think you got to dip your toe in on the financial side and decide what works for you. And also, what is your time worth, right? I know in a 60-hour week of working, basically what I make per hour and what my time's worth. So if a fractional role isn't going to pay me that, unless there's upside for a permanent role later, I'm probably not going to do that. But here's how and why this works. A startup has a certain amount of funding. Their burn rate is important to monitor. They need a chief medical officer, but they can't afford to hire a full time. So they may say, hey, I can pay you $10,000, $12,000 a month. That's what I can afford. So, for them, that's $120,000 a year for your health, 2 days a week. And that 2 days a week may be 4 hours of Zoom calls, and then make yourself available on text or email if they have questions, right? It's whatever can be negotiated. But when you think about it, these side hustles, just like being on the speaking circuit for companies, it's kind of nice because now with Zoom and what we're doing now, you get to be an asset without having to get on a plane, without having to be at a dinner and do a talk. You can present to a board or a potential investor via remote video. So the flexibility of you having 2 or 3 fractional roles is a true possibility. How thin do you want to stretch yourself is the question. And, how frustrated do you want to be, because your weekends are going to be taken up sometimes because you guys are busy. So you're going to say, hey, I'm going to do my day job at Hope Vascular during the week. I've also got to do my podcast on the weekends, and I'm advising 3 companies on the side. So I would say start with 1, see how that goes. If you feel you have more bandwidth, expand to a second and do it that way.
So we were talking earlier to a financial coach in the tech environment about the process of negotiating salaries and interviewing and all this. And so one of the things that he was talking about is, what's the culture behind your compensation package? And I guess what tickles me about this fractional world that you're discussing may not necessarily even be that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would love to have $100,000 extra if I have the time to divest myself to become a true asset. But I think what would tickle me more is, what does that comp plan come with, right? Because if I am a startup, I am not able to necessarily pay you all this money. This may be a fractional, but then here's the safe notes. Here are our stock options. And if you help us get to the next level, then I would create a very comprehensive plan where there's this vesting that happens with time, maybe with some goals, the first IDE study, the first enrolled patient. Like, you make the comp plan in a very articulate way, and all of a sudden, that 120, who cares? Maybe you're going to end up with $5 million when the company exits, right? That's what to me makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Now you're speaking the language of the clients I represent and the individuals that are interviewing with those companies. So say I'm building a startup company and they've just got a nice round of funding, but not enough to where they can afford to build out an entire commercial team just yet. But they want to have, chief medical officer, maybe a VP of marketing. And they say, hey, Ryan, find me a doctor or a business professional from this space and let them know that we can't go real heavy on comp, but we can look at a nice equity position for them. And, that equity will vest over 3 years, a third, or 4 years, 25% a year. And we're going to try not to dilute that so that, when we do go public or get acquired, it'll be a nice liquidation event for all who join early and grind it out with us, right? And if you're employee number 1 to number 10, you're going to have a pretty nice equity position in these companies. Now let's be real. 1 out of 10 of these startups actually have a nice exit or acquisition. It's hard to be a startup, but I'll take a 1 in 10 chance. That's better than playing the lottery, right? If you told me I could win the lottery and I had a 1 in 10 chance at a liquidation event, I play the lottery every weekend. I know the odds of the lottery. I don't play it. I play the startup lottery, right? And our company, our our founders and a lot of our partners invest right early on in these companies, or will take an equity stake versus, our traditional fees, because we believe in these companies as well. And then we can be part of that liquidation event. So it's the same thought process for us as it is for you and individuals we're representing for these companies.
I think the part where I would politely disagree is comparing it to buying a ticket in gambling on the lotto. Just because buying a ticket takes you $1 and a minute of your time.
Sure.
Whereas this other gamble, it's potentially a significant amount of time of your life that you're going to spend, and you may come out absolutely empty-handed. And I say that out of experience. And very early on, I want to say about 10 years ago, I remember, signing with this particular company. And at the time, I thought their technology was interesting, but I didn't really understand the business that much. And they said, hey, we don't have any liquidity. We're not going to pay you, but, we're going to give you a shit ton of stock option. And it was actually a shit ton of stock option. And you're going to make millions and millions and millions of dollars. It was like 5 years later, man. I'm on the phone with this group like every other week. Yeah. Like I'm flying, I'm giving talks, I'm on podiums, I wrote papers. And then I got a call and they're like, oh, hey, just letting you know, we fizzled out. The company to go out where.
Yeah.
And I looked back and I wanted to just rip my eyes off because I put so much effort in trying to get that company somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, story, what do you learn from that? You learn that you have to find some sort of middle ground, and maybe your compromise is, all right, I'm not gonna take a salary, but you are gonna pay me an hourly rate. I may not take $800, but I will take $400 an hour, right? Like you find these compromises.
Yep.
And I wouldn't even get to that point unless you absolutely love the technology.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing I learned is before I was like a puppy, right?
Yeah.
And oh, there's an opportunity there. Oh, there's an opportunity. Now I'm like, thanks.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah, your time's important, right?
Yeah.
How important is your time?
You realize that it just has to be and to your point, maybe that's because I've like essentially stopped doing all that because I felt like it was a waste of my time. But to your point, maybe if there is a group of smart, intelligent people in the middle that act as my representative.
Consigliere.
Correct. But let's say that you say like, no, like I know the level of Ontario Baker, like I know what he's looking for, and I'm not going to put him in front of shit companies that aren't going to give him a good option. Because he's not going to have the time and it's going to be underproductive and then we're going to look bad.
Yeah.
So it's on you almost. Like I'm pushing you to say, okay, go and get me a good deal that makes sense, that's worth my time, and let's make sure the technology makes sense.
Yeah.
Because then it's a win-win, man.
Yeah,
and we can negotiate, right?
We have to be able to. So look, our reputation's on the line too, right? And if we've been building companies and careers for 30 years, I mean, I'll give you some stats. We've placed over 9,000 people, including people like yourself, at over 900 companies in the past 30 years. Those are big numbers. They're not huge, but they're pretty big for a boutique medtech firm. And we want to make sure that we're working with serial entrepreneurs, people that have been successful, because our reputation's tied to it. But you bring up a great point. And the other thing I want you to think about and have your audience think about is, what gaps do I have on my CV? Right? So if you hadn't worked with a company before, maybe that's something you want to do. What is that experience worth to you? Well, guess what? You went through that experience. You probably learned a hell of a lot. And you've got a lot up here that is probably priceless that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. And now you're not going to go through the same thing again because of that experience.
True.
So yeah, it's one of those things that it's glass half empty or glass half full. And, I think you went through a tough experience, and a lot of people do. And that's why the decision up front has to be something where you bounce it off a known entity that has been through this. But at the end of the day, nothing, as you know, is guaranteed, right? So what is your bandwidth? What is your appetite for risk? And that's what I talk to people about all the time. Are you a risk averse person? Well, then a startup's probably not for you. unless, as you said, you are extremely passionate about the technology and it's something that, you're going to grind out to make sure it succeeds. So yeah, lots to talk about on that front. That could be a whole podcast. Maybe that'll be the next one that I have one of my colleagues talk to you guys about.
Yeah. What do you think makes what do you look for and see in physicians where you can say, identify someone? It's like, you would make a good chief medical officer, or you would be good in this space?
Sure. They ask good questions is the thing I look for the most. If
You're
they just
fucked, Lucas.
He just jumps right in.
And just like that, your career fizzled out in startup companies.
Yeah.
I love it when they say, Ryan, what problem are they solving? They start with that.
Yeah.
And then they follow up and say, how is that better than the gold standard? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, they look at things the way we as an organization look at things. And we have 4 pillars that we look at. We look at the market. So say you're getting into a market that's super crowded or that doesn't have a large total addressable market. How attractive is that to me to bet my career on a small market? So that's number one. Then we look at the team. I mentioned the people we've teamed up with that are serial entrepreneurs. Maybe they've got 120 patents to their name. They founded 4 companies. 2 have exited successfully. What is that leadership team? When you guys look at your career, who have you tied yourself to in your career, right? You guys go into business together because you trust each other and you know that you're going to grind it out and be successful. So what is the team at that company? So first is the market, second is the team, and then the vision, right? What is the vision, mission of that company? It needs to be audacious enough to make you want to bet your career on it. And finally, the product itself, right? What is the product like? What does it do? Is it better for the patient? Does it shorten workflow? All the things we talked about earlier when looking at that market as, is it solving the problem and is it doing it better than the gold standard? And even then, there's no guarantees. But when I have physicians asking me questions like that, I know they're the right person for the job versus somebody that just says, hands out, what do you have for me, Ryan? I'll do anything.
Yeah.
Are you running towards something? Or are you running from something, right? When I have physicians that say, I'm burnt out, I just want to be a CMO for industry, I'm like, do you really? Let's talk through that.
Yeah. How ill prepared is your average client? And when I'm saying client from the physician perspective, how ill prepared in their academic backgrounds, in their capacity to be business people, in their capacity to understand entrepreneurship, and how much, at what lengths do you guys go to potentially improve their odds at becoming a more interesting candidate for certain positions?
Yeah, we like to, first of all, if they have an MBA, they're probably going to be a lot better at the position than somebody that doesn't because they've had that business training. If they have some sort of business that they run on the side, maybe it's a retail business, right? Maybe their spouse runs something like that. They've got an idea of how businesses work. They've operated a profit and loss margin before. But I would say most physicians we deal with that are coming right out of their clinical background, they're not good business people. And you don't expect them to be because they haven't had to be, right? Everything's been sort of automated for them in whatever practice or hospital system they've joined, and they get what they get. So we walk through how to ask good questions, how to think like a business professional. We look at equity packages. We look at compensation. We help negotiate, fractional interim sort of contract jobs for them. And again, this isn't a large part of our business, but it's part of what we do. I would say more often, guys, we connect people like you with early stage companies that want your input on their products. And so they can decide, hey, how should we study this properly? Is this a company that you would represent? If yes, why? And if not, why? So those connections start early, and then we can see how your business acumen develops through that process. So yeah, we do a little bit of coaching, but I won't say too much because we really want the people that come in like yourselves that are studied up, that have maybe opened your own OBL or your ASC, because, we see the shift, right? We see the shift in surgical robotics right now, going into ASC, smaller footprint robots, right? Nobody's going to beat Da Vinci in the hospital. They got it on lock. So what do you do at the smaller spots? So those sorts of conversations are the ones that we want to know you understand. Like if you're talking, for example, GPO contracts, value analysis committees, putting a drug device combo on a formulary, we know that you understand all facets of the business, not just the narrow siloed world of where you work currently.
And so have you ever, I'm sorry, is there as a physician, I haven't quite understood this part. Is it the companies that are paying you guys to find those physicians?
Yes.
Or is the physician also paying some sort of fee to try to be allocated?
That's the beauty of what we do. We work with companies, and companies pay us to find top talent.
Okay. So the finder fee will come from the company that's in the need. And then, like, if I want to throw my name in the hat, that doesn't necessarily cost me anything, right?
It just costs you your time and the conversation. That's it.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
And have you ever turned people away? Like, fuck no, we're not going to put this guy. I'm not. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there's people that are like, this barred, Me Too, you know, hashtag Me Too problems, who knows what. And then they're like out of a job, and then they're trying to find something. I'm sure there's, listen, I'm sure there's people.
No, for sure.
Well, yeah, all our clients still do background checks on anybody they work with, right? Because their reputation's on the line, so they don't want to work with somebody that's been banned for whatever reason.
So the answer is yes. You've turned away physicians.
We don't. Our clients do. We don't do the background checks. That's it. But
that was very eloquent, very PC. I love it.
Yeah, we do. We're good at what we do, and we know where to draw the line on whose responsibility it is for what.
Yeah. That's super interesting. MBA or not MBA? You mentioned it in passing, but I'd like you to, because a lot of people ask me that. A lot of my trainees before would ask me, "Hey, doc, I'm getting to a point where I'm about to be done. I have the time. I really like the business." And I see a split kind of, people are like, nah, you know, you can learn it and, you know, or you're born with it. Like it's a natural born instinct. Or do people really want to invest in? Is that something that you guys would say, hey, that's a total winning thing and it really helps
it's a nice to have. It's not a need to have. I will say if somebody's had the experience as a physician in practice and they have their MBA, they're coming in with an advantage because they understand how businesses work, right? They've had to go through the training. However, if you expose yourself to those sorts of things in everyday life, whether you open, you know, I know physicians that own a Cycle Bar franchise. I know physicians that own a chain of Orange Theories or, you know, even a chain of like Culver's restaurants. You know, if you're operating a business, a small business or a franchise outside of your everyday practice, you don't need an MBA. There's no better experience in managing a business than that. So you got to do one or the other, though. You got to get your MBA from a college or university, or you got to get it through experience. But those are the things that we look at and say, well, is this all you have done your whole life? Okay. Well, in what you've done as a physician, how have you had to build your business? Do you have market development skills? Okay, that's a plus. Have you built up your own personal brand as a speaker? Okay, that's a plus because that's running a business. You probably started an LLC to have those checks sent to, right? So we look at all these areas to see what sort of business acumen do you have, and then we ask, have you started a business that has failed? Okay, what did you learn from that? Right? Or have you started a business and sold it? Okay, what sort of multiple did you sell it at? What was your revenue when you closed up? You know, when you sold it. So we ask all those questions.
So I've always seen physicians as advisors, years, right? Multiple advisors or a medical executive board or MAB or what have not. This trend of startups actually appointing a chief medical officer is a bit more contemporary. Sure. Do you know why this is? Like, why has it become a little bit more of a frequently thing seen? Because 10 years ago, none of the startups had CMOs. That's kind of like a thing that I've seen happening now in the last 3-5 years, maybe even more so in the last 2 years. Do you think what that trend is all about?
Yeah, it's the copycat trend is what it is. And so, nobody could run a 5-minute mile, right? And then somebody ran a 5-minute mile, and then boom, out of the woodwork, everybody can run a 5-minute mile. Not everybody, but it had never been done in years. And then right after somebody did it, boom, a couple more people did it. So you see the trend, and here's what the startup companies will tell you. If I have somebody who's a luminary in their space or well respected, and I have them on my board of directors or I have them as an advisor, that's going to bring credibility to my company. So what's the downside of having that name attached to my company? And maybe I just have to give them some equity. Maybe I pay them a little bit to speak at events, and it helps our notoriety. It helps our pitches when we're going for funding. So when something is done and it seems to be successful, it gets copied. I think of Medtronic. They hired Austin Chang, who's an influencer on TikTok, as their chief medical officer for their GI division, right? He's a practicing GI physician. I thought that was a brilliant move because all of his followers will now see everything Medtronic has. So they've got a GI Genius that helps detect polyps. Well, I only want to go to a hospital or a ASC that's owned by doctors that have the GI Genius,
Right.
I read an article once that this is like the Oprah effect. But Kim Kardashian's got millions of followers, right? I don't watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I'm not even really on Instagram. I'm a LinkedIn guy. But the stat was she has so many followers. If she hawks a product and only 1% of her followers buy that product, the person selling it is a millionaire overnight. Now, I doubt she's going to hawk your product for cheap. So you better hope that 1% of the people that follow her buy your product. But that just goes to show the power of scale. And I know you had, I listened to one of your podcasts a couple of weeks ago, and you had a social media person on. Was it Courtney?
Yeah.
Yes, Courtney.
Yeah. Somebody's dating Courtney, right? There you go.
Yeah.
Courtney had some great points on there about growing your personal brand. And so if I get on Twitter, where all the doctors live, and I see you're well branded on Twitter, not just with other physicians, but as you mentioned, half your listeners are industry people. Well, guess what? People from industry spend money and they refer their family members. So you've automatically got a built-in audience that you can monetize from industry. And by the way, most of these med device reps are making pretty good money, and they care about their families because they see what happens in these procedures. So you can see how you connect the dots, not just on the MBA side of things, but what are you doing to grow your own personal brand, Hope Vascular's brand. And so anybody trying to get into the business, I'll look at their Twitter, I'll look at their LinkedIn. I give a lot of tips to individuals and companies on attention and awareness. We have a hum, sing, shout strategy at the Mullings Group, and we want to stay top of mind for our clients at all times. And you have to be very prescriptive with that, and you have to be very professional. So hopefully, we can, I know we only got about 15 more minutes, but if you want to start digging into tips and strategies, not just for doctors, but anybody that wants to get noticed, I could probably add a couple to what Courtney said on the previous podcast that I think will be good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I would love that. I would love that because I was about to say, if you had to say MBA versus digital branding and presence and awareness, now it seems like that's probably more important, right?
Yeah, the latter is more important.
Yeah.
The question is, are you doing it in a professional manner, or are you part of, what we like to call clown town, right? Like, where it's obvious you're just reading off a script and you're one of those social media people trying to sell to the lowest common denominator. You want to be classy. You don't want to be Ron Burgundy. You want to keep it classy. Yeah,
that's right. Because that's exactly what I was telling Lucas about some of the tips Courtney was giving. I was like, I don't know that all of it does work. I mean, there's different enterprises, and I think in healthcare, you can't just troll the trolls, right? Just for followers, because that puts you into a questionable professionalism side, right? You have to have this much cleaner version of yourself as you grow that reputation and that credibility. So yeah, I understand some of these techniques that are very low-hanging fruit, but for us, they're just not okay. We just can't use some of these techniques. So please, by all means, what are your thoughts on this matter?
So Twitter's different than LinkedIn, and we live on LinkedIn for our business. And I mentioned we have about 175,000 followers between our Mullings Group page Joe Mullings, our CEO, and then all of the various people that work for the company. I think I've got 14,300 followers. Which
imagine after this show, Jesus,
right?
You're
Just
gonna,
imagine.
You're gonna explode, brother.
Just wait. A strategy I like to talk about, guys, is I call it give to get. And what I mean by that is there are founders on LinkedIn. There are CEOs on LinkedIn. What I tell people is think of the people that you admire. Think of the people that made an impact on your career, whether they're peers of yours or not. Find their name on LinkedIn and go write them a recommendation. Just unsolicited, just say, hey, you probably don't know this, but you profoundly impacted my career in this way. Or when I worked at this company, I saw you did this and I've always remembered it. Thank you. Whatever it is, find 5 to 10 people that you really admire and unsolicited, write them a recommendation. And what's going to happen is they're going to call you or email you back and say, thank you for the recommendation. I wasn't expecting that. What are you up to? And then that opens up the conversation of, actually, I was thinking about moving into industry as a chief medical officer. Do you have any advice? Boom. When people know that people are looking and they like you, and by the way, you just wrote them a review, so they're going to like you. People like to help people. That's just our nature, right? Good people know good people. People like to help people. They're going to use your network and their network to help you. But if you never make that outreach, it's never going to happen. And I'm not saying selfishly write a review in hopes to get a response back. You might not, but most of the times you do. So give to get is the number one strategy. Mm-hmm. Number two, you're going to see postings on LinkedIn for all kinds of jobs, whether it's a chief medical officer, an advisor, a consultant. Don't just apply to that job and connect with the person that posted it. That's what every other person does. Find out who that person is, and then Google the 800 number of that company and call them and say, hey, this is Miguel. I'm calling back for Ryan Blasko. We just connected on LinkedIn. Please hold. Boom. They connect you to me. Hey, this is Ryan Blasko. Hey, this is Miguel. I just applied for your fractional chief medical officer job. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm sure you get a lot of applications. Just wanted to see if it's a fit. That's where everything starts. You have to be willing to pursue the career that you want in a way that nobody else is. And everybody else expects everything to come to them. If you want something, you got to go get it. And so put together strategies, give to get, be different than everyone else. And finally, what I'll say, and you've seen this on Twitter, I'm sure, show your subject matter expertise. LinkedIn's a platform where people aren't creating content, right? They're just not. So if you're creating content or adding value, you're going to get noticed. You're going to show up in the feed of the companies you admire, right? These startups, the people you admire. So anything in the vascular space, comment like you would on Twitter on LinkedIn. You're going to get noticed. You're going to show up in people's feed. They're going to click on your name. So I tell people 3 things as we wrap up here. We got likes. I say likes are lazy, but they're better than nothing. Comments are comfortable, but they do show your subject matter expertise. But sharing sells. All right. Sharing sells you. It sells your brand. It sells your company. If somebody posts something that you find valuable, reshare it and then add your thoughts on why you thought it was valuable. Because now your entire network, your thousands of followers just saw this other person's post, which just explodes their post, right? It's like compound interest. So people are very thankful that you did it, and it allows you to sort of showcase yourself in a very, very humble way.
Which of if you had to choose one or the other, or is the answer no, absolutely not, you got to use both, which would you recommend for physicians?
So there are 2 different platforms. For business, LinkedIn. For clinical, Twitter.
A healthy utilization should be used both, and one to kind of show your professional acumens, the other one to show your business interests, maybe something like that. Would that make any sense?
Yep. And you can grow the same following on LinkedIn that you have on Twitter by sharing the same thing on both platforms. And there's even programs, I'm sure Courtney's told you about them, that can allow you to post to multiple platforms at once. So it automates it for you. But certainly I would focus more on the business side on LinkedIn. That's where the businesses live. And then the clinical side on Twitter.
That's awesome, man.
I should say X. I don't know why I keep saying Twitter.
Because everybody does.
Yeah.
It really
You know?
does.
Yeah.
I think they still call it tweeting, but I'm an Elon Musk fan, and I know you guys are right in Austin where he's at. So
Xing. Do you say Xing?
No.
You say tweeting, but it's X.
Yeah. It's Twitter. It's old Twitter or new Twitter. Well,
Right.
Ryan, this was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of people are going to find this very refreshing, and it's going to give like a brand new perspective on something that probably a lot of people didn't even know was an opportunity. So thank
What
you
if
for the
there are
time.
some guys out there, guys, gals, whatever, physicians that are out there and they're like, you know what, I'd love to talk to Ryan a little bit more. Would you be welcoming to hear from them? And if so, is there some sort of way to get in touch with you guys? What would you advise for people tickled by this and wanting to talk to you more?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. LinkedIn's the best way. Hit me up on LinkedIn, shoot a message. I talk to 30 to 40 people a day for about 15 minutes each. And then those usually lead to follow-up conversations. I share these tips with everyone. I'd say about 10% of the people I talk to do them. And that 10% usually get the career they want much quicker than the ones that don't. So you get what you put into it, right, in this life. But yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn. And I try to follow up with everybody. It's hard, but I try to do it. So,
well, dude, listen, I appreciate you tremendously. I know it's a Saturday, and I'm sure you have a lot better things to do. But hey, this is the best podcast in the world, and so I'm glad you took some time. Your career is going to explode from now on. Seriously, I appreciate you. Thank you very much, and I hope that we can continue working and collaborating in many other ways, Ryan.
Yeah, definitely. Hit me up if you guys need anything at all. I really am excited to work with you and appreciate you having me on as a guest.
Appreciate it, Ryan.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.